The morning I found out, I was standing at our kitchen sink in Naperville, rinsing Ethan's cereal bowl, when my husband walked past me, patted my shoulder like I was furniture, and said he'd be late. He was wearing the watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, the one I'd had engraved on the back, "Because of you." That night I stood in our hallway at 11 p.m. and listened to him explain to his attorney, through a door he thought was shut, exactly how he planned to leave me with nothing. He didn't know I'd been awake for a while. He didn't know I'd been paying attention for longer than that. My name is Marina. I'm 38 years old, and I have been, for most of my adult life, the kind of woman who solves problems before anyone else knows they exist. I grew up in a house in Evanston where my mother worked double hospital shifts, and my father ran the books for 3 small businesses off a folding table in our kitchen. By the time I was 16, I could read a balance sheet faster than most grown men. By 22, I had a financial analysis degree from the University of Illinois and an offer from a consulting firm in the Loop. I thought I was going to be somebody. And then I met Ryan Callahan at a client dinner in the spring of my 24th year. And for a long time, I thought meeting him was the same thing. Ryan had the kind of face that makes you feel chosen. Dark hair, slow smile, this way of giving you his full attention that felt rare and expensive. He ran a small commercial real estate firm he'd started with a college friend. And he talked about it the way other men talked about their kids, with this almost territorial pride. I was gone inside of 3 months. We got married 18 months after that, small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, and I stood there in that garden and cried at his vows because I believed every single word. I want you to hold on to that, because the rest of this story only makes sense if you understand that I was genuinely, completely in. The early years were real. I want to say that clearly. Ryan's firm, Callahan Commercial Properties, had about 12 clients when we got married. Within 3 years, it had 40. Some of that was Ryan, his charm, his relationships, his ability to walk into a room and make investors feel safe. But a lot of it was me, and he knew it, even if he only ever said it sideways. I was the one who rebuilt the billing system when his original partner walked out and took half the files. I was the one who caught a $200,000 contractor discrepancy that would have buried us. I built the financial reporting infrastructure from scratch, the thing that let Ryan walk into meetings with real numbers instead of just confidence. He used to joke about it at dinner parties, lifting his wine glass toward me. "Marina keeps the engine running. I just drive the car." Everyone laughed. I smiled. I didn't understand yet that in his mind, the driver owned the car. The engine was just a part. Ethan came when I was 27, and I left the consulting firm not long after because Ryan's business needed someone full-time, and it made sense for that someone to be me. We had the 4-bedroom in Naperville with the yard backing up to the creek. We had good income. Ethan was doing great in school, and I told myself I wasn't trading my career for his. I was investing in ours. So I built a home office in the spare bedroom and ran Callahan Commercial's finances with the same precision I'd brought to any corporate client. I tracked cash flow, handled payroll, prepped taxes, flagged risks. I was, functionally, the CFO of a company my name was nowhere on, because Ryan had incorporated before we married and never restructured. I hadn't asked him to. I trusted him. God, I trusted him. The Tuesday I'm thinking about was an ordinary one. Ethan had been awake since 6, which meant I had been awake since 6, and by 7:15, we were both at the kitchen island. Him working through a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Me on my second coffee, half watching the news on the small TV above the fridge. The January light through the window was that particular Chicago gray, the kind that makes everything look like a photograph taken slightly out of focus. "Mom," Ethan said without looking up from his bowl, "if a company has 2 owners, but one owner does all the work, does the other one still get half?" If you're liking this so far, don't forget to subscribe, and tell me in the comments your location and the time there. I love seeing where everyone's watching from. I looked at him. He was 11 and building robots and asking better questions than most of the executives I'd worked with. Legally, I said, it depends on the agreement. He chewed. That seems wrong, he said. Yeah, I said, it kinda does. Ryan came downstairs 10 minutes later in his navy suit, kissed the top of Ethan's head, patted my shoulder, said he'd be late, and was gone. The watch was on his wrist. I watched his car back out of the driveway, and I finished my coffee, and I didn't think about the conversation again for months. Not until I had reason to. The first sign I almost missed. It was late January, and Ryan started keeping his phone face down on the counter. He'd been a face-up person for 14 years. Just a habit, nothing meaningful on its own. But I noticed it the way I noticed things. Quietly, filed away, not yet acted on. Then he started taking calls in the garage, even in 15-degree weather, which he explained by saying he didn't want to disturb Ethan's homework. Ethan was in his room with headphones on watching YouTube. I mentioned it once, lightly, and Ryan said, "You know how I get when I'm pacing," and smiled, and I let it go. I was good at letting things go. I'd had a lot of practice. February is when I found it. I was pulling documents for annual tax prep and went looking for a client file in the shared drive. I found a folder labeled with a string of numbers instead of a name. Wrong, because I had built our naming system and nobody used number strings. I clicked on it. Incorporation documents, something called Lakeview Property Solutions, LLC, registered in Delaware, filed 6 weeks earlier. Sole member, Ryan T. Callahan. My name, not present. I sat there and stared at it for a long time. I told myself there were legitimate reasons, business strategy, tax structure, something he was still figuring out. I closed the folder. I made dinner. I said nothing, but I took a screenshot before I closed it, and I saved it somewhere Ryan didn't have access to. March, I started paying the kind of attention I knew how to pay. Ryan mentioned a new attorney named Philip Donovan. Casually, the way you mention someone you've been talking to for a while. I asked who he was, and Ryan said, "Just some business restructuring stuff, nothing you need to worry about," in the tone that had never once in my life made me less worried. I searched Phil Donovan, Attorney Chicago, that night after Ryan was asleep. Family law specialist. Secondary focus on business asset division. I closed my laptop and sat in the kitchen dark for a moment. Then I opened a spreadsheet and started a log. By April, I had 3 confirmed facts. Lakeview Property Solutions had filed for an operating license in Cook County. 2 of our existing Callahan commercial clients had signed new lease agreements, not with Callahan, with Lakeview. I found this in the shared accounting system before Ryan apparently remembered I still had access. And Ryan had met with Phil Donovan at least 4 times, based on parking charges on our joint card at a LaSalle Street garage half a block from Donovan's office. I didn't confront him. I documented and said nothing. But something in me still needed to hear it out loud, still needed to be wrong. That need is what walked me into the hallway at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in May, glass of water in hand, not really thirsty, heading toward the kitchen for a reason I couldn't name. I heard him before I reached the stairs. His home office shared a wall with the upstairs hall, and the door was pulled almost shut, but not latched. His voice was relaxed, deal-closing mode, almost amused. "No, look, Phil, she's not going to be a problem," he was saying. My feet stopped. Marina's smart, I'll give her that, but she's been out of the actual business world for over a decade. She kept the books, but she never understood the business. A pause. A short laugh. Easy, like a man discussing something already decided. She'll walk away with nothing and think she got a fair deal. Another pause. She's dead weight at this point. The company's been running without her for 2 years, and she doesn't even know it. Just make sure the Lakeview transfer is clean before we file. I want everything moved before she has access to a lawyer. I stood in that hallway and did not move. The glass of water was cold against my palm. The hardwood floor under my feet was solid, specific, real. I breathed through my nose the way I used to breathe before difficult client presentations. Slow, through the count of 4, until my hands stopped wanting to shake. I thought about the garden. I thought about Ethan down the hall. I thought about 14 years of payroll, 14 years of tax returns, 14 years of fires put out before Ryan ever smelled smoke. And then something inside me went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with defeat. Not a door slamming, a door locking. I turned around, went back to the bedroom. Put the water on the nightstand. When Ryan came to bed an hour later, I was lying still with my eyes closed. I stayed that way until morning. I was already planning. The thing about financial analysis is that it doesn't turn off. Even in the worst moment of your life, some part of your brain keeps running the numbers. I lay in that bed and I didn't think about how much it hurt. I thought about assets. I thought about documentation. I thought about the fact that I had prepared every tax return this company had ever filed, that I had access to every record it had ever generated, and that the shell company transfer Ryan was describing to his attorney wasn't just a betrayal. It was, depending on execution, potentially a federal crime. He thought he had 30 days to clean up the Lakeview transfer before filing. I was going to spend every one of those days building something he couldn't walk away from. I got up at 6, made Ethan's breakfast, drove him to school, came home, and started. My first call was to Dana Kowalski, my college roommate, who was now a tax attorney in Schaumburg. We'd stayed close through all of it: marriages, kids, distance, the kind of friendship that lasts because it was never built on convenience. I told her I needed to talk, off the record, just us. She said noon. I drove out and sat across from her in a conference room and laid out everything: the LLC, the client transfers, Donovan's specialty, the timeline. Dana listened the way she always had, without interrupting, without making the face people make when they're calculating what to say. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said carefully. "If you transferred those contracts without disclosure, that's fraudulent conveyance. And if Lakeview is being used to hide marital assets before filing," she paused, "that's contempt of court before he's even filed." She wrote a name on a card and slid it across the table. "Catherine Hale, Michigan Avenue. She's the best I know at Business Asset Division in divorce. But Marina," she tapped the card once with her finger, "don't say a word to him yet. Not one word." I picked up the card. "I wasn't planning to," I said. Catherine Hale's office was on Michigan Avenue with a view of Millennium Park. She wore her gray hair short and her suits dark, and she had the stillness of someone who had heard every version of human betrayal and made peace with her inability to be surprised by any of it. I liked her the moment I walked in. I sat across from her the following Tuesday while Ethan was at his after-school program, and I told the same story I'd told Dana. But this time, I had a printed copy of the Lakeview docs, the invoice discrepancies, and an Excel timeline of every piece of evidence color-coded by category. Catherine looked at the spreadsheet. "You built this?" "Yes." "In how long?" 4 days. She looked up at me. A beat. "We're going to be fine," she said, and clicked her pen against the desk. "But I need everything. Every return, every statement, every document you can reach. Pull it all and back it up somewhere he can't touch." I was already nodding. I'd been uploading to a private cloud under my maiden name since the morning after the hallway. "There's something else," I said, and I told her about the IRS angle. Because there was an IRS angle. I'd been reviewing 6 years of corporate returns while pulling files for Catherine, and I'd found a pattern I recognized immediately because I had built the system these numbers ran through. Equipment purchases with no corresponding purchase records. Travel expenses on dates Ryan had told me he was somewhere else. A subcontractor payment appearing 3 years running to a company I could not locate in any public database anywhere. Catherine's pen stopped. "Are you certain?" she asked. "I'm a financial analyst," I said. "I built the reporting system this company runs on." "I'm certain." She leaned back. "Then we need to make a second call." That night I sat at my kitchen table, Ethan asleep, a glass of Malbec untouched beside me, and the coffee I'd made at 9 went cold while I sat reading the same expense line over and over, confirming what I already knew. Ryan had been skimming, steadily, methodically. Inflated expenses, phantom vendors, underreported income, somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 in avoided federal taxes over 6 years. On returns I had prepared, with my name on the preparer line. He hadn't just planned to steal the company. He had used me as his cover. I called Dana back. "I need a name at IRS Criminal Investigation," I said. There was a pause that lasted long enough for me to hear Dana set something down on her desk. Marina. Her voice was careful, the way it got when she was thinking faster than she was talking. "Are you sure you want to do this? Because once you make that call..." "Dana." "Okay," she said. "Okay. But I need you to understand what this means. This isn't just divorce strategy anymore. This is federal. If they open an inquiry, your name is on those returns too." I already knew that. I'd been sitting with that specific fact for 3 hours by the time I called her, turning it over, looking at it from every angle. "My name is on them because he put it there," I said, "because he needed a preparer signature, and I was convenient, and he never once thought I'd read what I was signing." "I read everything, Dana." A longer pause. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I know you do." Silence. Then she gave me a name. The next 7 months were the hardest work of my life. Not dramatic, not thrilling, precise, exhausting, lonely. Every morning, breakfast, school drop-off, desk. Documentation for Catherine, supplemental materials for Agent Flores at IRS Criminal Investigation, who was careful and professional and never once asked me why I was reporting my own husband, because the documents made the reason self-evident. Every evening, dinner, homework, TV on the couch sometimes, Ryan beside me, his hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze mine, and me not pulling away because I was not finished. The watch on his wrist, every time. In June, he floated the restructuring story over dinner. "Thinking about bringing in some outside investors," he said, cutting his steak, watching my face. "Potentially rebranding. Nothing immediate, maybe 6 months to a year." I nodded and asked about the timeline and passed him the bread. He relaxed. He thought I was tracking the narrative he'd built for me. He didn't know that 6 of our 12 major clients had already moved to Lakeview, or that I had copies of every one of those transition agreements pulled from a version of the shared drive he'd forgotten to lock me out of. The August confrontation wasn't planned. It was a Saturday, Ethan at a friend's house, Ryan making a grocery list at the island while I unloaded the dishwasher. There was something about the ordinary weight of it, 14 years of Saturdays, 14 years of grocery lists, that pushed against something in me I couldn't hold back anymore. I set a mug on the shelf. "I know about Lakeview," I said. Quiet, not looking at him. The pen stopped moving. I heard him set it down. When I turned around, his face was running through something complicated. Surprise, then a flash of something close to fear, then the reset to controlled, reasonable Ryan. "What do you mean?" he said. His voice was steady. I gave him credit for that. I found the incorporation documents in February, I said. I know about Phil Donovan. I know you've been transitioning clients for months." He pulled out a stool and sat down, and he had the nerve to look sad. "Marina," he said, in the client management tone, the one that meant, "I hear you, and you're being unreasonable," simultaneously. "Look, I was going to talk to you about this. I've just been trying to figure out the right..." "Don't," I said, flat as a closed account. He stopped. "I'm not interested in the explanation," I said. "I just needed you to know that I know." I picked up my mug and walked out. He knocked on my office door 20 minutes later. I said I needed space. He went away. He thought I knew about the LLC and was hurt. He had no idea what I had. September brought a different kind of confrontation. Ryan had been spending long evenings on his phone, and one night I came into the living room and found him sitting in the dark, posture tight, something wrong in the set of his shoulders. "Everything okay?" I asked, still performing the expected version of myself. He looked up slowly. "I got a note from one of our accountants," he said. "Someone pulled 6 years of corporate returns from the shared server. He was watching me the way you watch something you're not sure is alive." I kept my face completely empty. "What do you mean?" I said. "Which accountant?" He shook his head. "That's not the point, Marina. You're the only other person with access." The jaw muscle along his left cheek went tight. I sat at the far end of the couch and looked at him directly. "I pull financial documents all the time," I said. "That's always been my job." He twisted his wedding ring, a tale I'd cataloged 1,000 times. 6 years of returns, he said, voice dropping. "Why would you need 6 years?" "Annual reconciliation," I said. "You know I run one every fall." Not entirely a lie. I did run reconciliations. I just hadn't mentioned that this one had a federal recipient. He stared at me for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded and looked back at his phone. "Right," he said. "Yeah, okay." That night, I called Catherine from my car in the driveway, engine running, heat on, and told her Ryan might be moving up his timeline. She said his attorney had been in contact with her office. Filing was likely in 4 to 6 weeks. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked at the house. Ethan's light on upstairs. Ryan's shadow passing the kitchen window. "Yes," I said. October, Ryan came home with tulips. Yellow ones, which had been my favorite when we first started dating, before I'd mentioned switching to peonies, which he'd never updated. He set them on the counter and said we should talk, really talk, and he had the look of a man who had rehearsed. Ethan was at school. I made coffee. Ryan sat at the island and laid out what he called a vision. The restructuring was more complicated than expected. He wanted to be transparent. Maybe they should sit with both attorneys, figure out something that worked for everyone. He looked at me with the eyes that had gotten me at 24. "I know things have been off," he said. "I want to fix it." I looked at the tulips. I looked at him. "Okay," I said. "Let's do that." He looked relieved. He reached across and squeezed my hand. I let him. I was thinking about the 14 folders in my locked desk drawer. He thought we were going to negotiate. He thought I was going to sit across a table from a mediator and walk away grateful for scraps. He still thought I was the woman who kept the books. That was going to be expensive. The Friday he chose was late November, one of those Chicago mornings that settles into your bones before you're fully awake. He'd made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, Ethan's favorite, which was unusual enough to register. He drove Ethan to school himself. When he came back, there were flowers on the counter, grocery store bouquet and the crystal vase from our wedding registry, and he was in the Navy suit. I was at the counter with my second coffee, and I knew before he opened his mouth. "Marina," he said, with the practiced gentleness of a closing argument, "I think we both know things haven't been working." He reached into his jacket. Sealed envelope. He held it out with the expression of a man who believes he is being merciful. "My attorney's put together something fair, something we can both live with." He set it on the counter next to the flowers. Small smile, regretful, controlled. He thought this was his ceremony. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the flowers. I looked at him. And then I smiled. A real one, not performed. And I watched something flicker across his face before he smoothed it back. "Okay," I said. I picked up the envelope and set it next to my mug without opening it. "I'll have my attorney look at it." He nodded, said something about keeping it civil, for Ethan, said he appreciated my maturity. I said, of course. He left at 9:15, watch on his wrist, Navy suit, carrying his future like it was already sealed. I waited until I heard his car clear the driveway. Then I texted Catherine, 1 word. Then Agent Flores. Then I called Derek Marsh at the Tribune. Derek covered business and finance, and I'd been feeding him documentation since September. Off the record, under my maiden name, through a private account. I told him that morning it was on the record now. He asked if I had documentation. 14 folders, I said. He said he'd have something by Tuesday. The weekend was the strangest I'd lived. Ryan went to his brother's in Evanston. I ordered pizza with Ethan, and we watched a movie, and he fell asleep on the couch, and I sat in the dark next to him for a long time, watching him breathe. 11 years old. None of this was his. I was going to make sure none of it touched him. Monday. IRS Criminal Investigation executed a formal inquiry into Callahan Commercial Properties and Lakeview Property Solutions, LLC. Both sets of corporate accounts flagged pending review. Ryan couldn't move money, couldn't transfer assets, couldn't do anything the plan had required. Catherine called me at 8:15. I was already at my desk. I said thank you and hung up and sat still for a moment. The quiet in the house felt different than it had before. Not empty, settled. Tuesday, the Tribune piece ran. Derek had done clean work. Shell company structure, client transfers, tax irregularities, all of it laid out without sensationalism. Ryan's name in the headline. I read it twice. The coffee stayed warm. Wednesday, 2 major clients sent formal contract terminations to Callahan Commercial. Greg Talbot, Ryan's business partner, called Ryan to demand an emergency meeting, and then called me, which I hadn't expected. He was scared and angry and wanted to understand what was happening to the company. "Get your own attorney," I told him. I can't speak for Ryan. He said he understood. He said he was sorry. I said he had nothing to be sorry for, and I meant it. And then I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes with the engine off because I didn't want Ethan to see my face while I let the weight of what was in motion settle through me. It was done. All I had to do was stay out of its way. Thursday morning, 7:42 a.m., his name on my screen. I was in my bathrobe, Ethan's cereal bowl still on the table, gray November light through the window over the sink. I let it ring 3 times. I thought about the hallway, the watch, dead weight. I picked up. His voice was something I'd never heard before, stripped of everything he'd been using as armor since the day I met him. He said my name like it was a question. He said he didn't understand. Accounts frozen, clients gone, the Tribune, the IRS. He just needed to talk to me, just needed to understand, and his voice broke on the last word. Actually broke. I stood in my kitchen and listened to it break, and I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, very quietly, "Enjoy the car, Ryan." I ended the call, set the phone face down on the counter, poured a second cup of coffee, went and woke up my son. Ethan looked at me across the breakfast table. "You seem different," he said. "Different how?" I asked. He thought about it, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Like when a problem gets solved," he said. "Yeah," I said. "That's pretty much it." He nodded like that made sense and asked if his friend Marcus could come over after school. I said yes. I drove him in, watched him disappear through the doors, and sat in the school parking lot for a few minutes in the way I'd been doing all fall. Just breathing, letting the stillness be still. Then I drove home, and I went to work. 6 months against 14 years isn't a fair trade, but it was the only one available. By May, the divorce was finalized in a proceeding Ryan's attorney must have described to him as a catastrophe, because there is no more accurate word. Catherine's fraudulent conveyance argument unwound the Lakeview structure almost entirely. Once the client contracts were clawed back, the LLC had no operating foundation and collapsed. The IRS investigation held everything in suspension, which meant Ryan couldn't access most of what he thought he'd protected. The marital estate, properly inventoried by a forensic accountant who spent 3 weeks with my 14 folders, turned out to be significantly larger than what Ryan had disclosed. I was awarded 51% of Callahan Commercial's assessed value. Ryan's attorney couldn't effectively dispute it because I had 14 years of documented contributions signed in my own handwriting, and there was no version of those documents that didn't tell the same story. Ryan got 49% of a company that by then had lost 2/3 of its major clients and was under federal scrutiny. His attorney got paid from whatever Ryan could liquidate. He was in a month-to-month furnished studio in the South Loop by March. The IRS case moved at the pace federal cases move, slowly, without reversal. Phil Donovan had declined to continue the representation once the investigation went formal. The new attorney was managing what could be managed, which was not much. You don't escape 6 years of documented tax fraud when the person who prepared your returns stops covering for you. Ethan adjusted the way kids do when they're given honesty instead of tension. He asked questions I answered in age-appropriate ways. He saw his father on alternate weekends and came home quiet sometimes, and I left space around the quiet without filling it. He started a robotics club in February, won a regional competition in April. I sat in that school gymnasium and watched him accept a small trophy, and my chest went so full of something clean and uncomplicated that I had to breathe around it. That part had always been real. Nothing that happened with Ryan touched it. By May, I'd rented out the Naperville house and leased a place in Lincoln Square, north side, closer to the city, mine in a way the Naperville house had never quite been. Different light, different pace. Ethan could bike to a taco place 3 blocks away without me driving him, which he considered a significant upgrade in his quality of life. I'd taken on 2 consulting clients under my own name, using the skills I'd kept sharp for 14 years, while everyone assumed I was just keeping books. A 3rd inquiry came in June. It turned out that when you have 14 years of results and a professional reputation that belongs entirely to you, clients come fairly readily. There's a morning I keep coming back to, early May, last week before the move. I was in the Naperville home office packing the final files, and at the bottom of the last drawer, I found the folder I'd started the morning after the hallway. The log, the timeline, the Lakeview screenshot. I sat on the floor in the morning light and held it for a while. I thought about the woman who had built it, standing in a hallway at 11 p.m. with a glass of water and 14 years of silence behind her, making a choice about what kind of person she was going to be in the worst moment of her life. She had been very precise. She had done very good work. I put the folder in the recycling bin, taped up the box, and carried it to the car. I didn't need the map anymore. I knew exactly where I was going. The Lincoln Square apartment had a kitchen window that faced east, and on clear mornings the light came in early and strong in a way I hadn't had in Naperville, where the trees were too tall and too close, and the yard was beautiful, but the house felt like someone else's idea of what a life should look like. This was mine. Small, bright, 2 bedrooms, a radiator that knocked in the cold. Ethan put his robotics trophies on the windowsill of his room and said it felt like a real room, which I took as the highest possible compliment from an 11-year-old. We got a cat in June, a gray tabby named Algorithm, which was Ethan's idea and which I was not going to argue with. Some mornings I sat at that east-facing kitchen window with my first cup of coffee, Algorithm on the table beside me doing the specific cat thing of staring at nothing, and I thought about how many mornings I'd spent in the Naperville kitchen, maintaining an atmosphere instead of just existing in one. There's a difference. I know that now. The consulting practice grew faster than I'd expected. By August, I had 4 clients, 2 of them mid-sized commercial firms that had heard my name through people who had worked with Callahan Commercial and remembered that the numbers had always been solid. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. 14 years of demonstrated results leaves a trail, if the person who did the work is finally in a position to claim it. I hired a part-time assistant in September. I rented actual office space in October, a small suite in a building on Damon, nothing fancy, but mine in the way the only things worth having are yours. I put my name on the door. First time in 14 years I'd done that. Ryan built his whole plan on one assumption, that the woman who kept the books would never read them closely enough to matter. He spent 14 years watching me work and never understood what the work actually was. Every transaction is a sentence. Every ledger is a record of decisions someone made. And eventually, given the right reader and the right amount of time, every record tells the truth. He wrote the same confession for 6 years and signed my name to the bottom of it. He thought silence was the same as compliance. He thought invisible was the same as gone. He called me dead weight, and I let him, because I was already carrying something he didn't know about. Every document, every discrepancy, every year of work he'd taken credit for, organized in 14 folders, waiting for the moment I decided to put it down. That moment came. I put it down, and I walked out from under it lighter than I had been in a very long time.